If you haven't already, make sure you've cleaned off any glue from the surface of the foam with an adhesive cleaner. Do this for all of the armour. Next, wipe down the foam with a slightly damp cloth to get rid of any excess dust on the top. Next, we're going to heat seal the foam, and the most important thing is to remove any other materials out the way. So anything that could get affected by the heat, such as fabric materials like the elastic, the webbing, any velcro. Foam has pores that are usually open, and if you add heat it closes those pores and it makes it much easier to be able to prime and paint the surface. Just be careful around these leather parts. I turned down the heat quite a bit when heat sealing the van braces and shoulder armour. Before priming, make sure you mask off any areas that are not to get the primer. So for this I've obviously got leather underneath the van braces, and I'm covering those with frog tape. To prime the armour, I put some Flexbond into a cup with a tiny little bit of water. I then take a paintbrush and cover the entire surface of the foam with the Flexbond. Flexbond is actually a flexible adhesive, and it's used for like scenic materials on stage, but it works really well for priming armour with cosplay. So when you bend an armour that's got Flexbond on it, you won't get any cracking or anything like that. After the first coat is applied, I wait roughly 30 minutes and then apply the second coat. After a further 30 minutes or so, I apply one last third coat. Now I leave all the primed armour overnight to dry fully. So here's one of the domes, and you can see from the way it's dried, you can see brush strokes and it's not very smooth. This causes an issue as we need this to be chrome later, and anything metallic will show up any sort of flaw really well. So how did I get it from the left hand side to the right hand side? Well, what you can do with Flexbond is you can actually add water and make it return to its original state. So I add some water to the surface and spread it out with my fingers. I then take a cloth and wipe the surface. This will remove some of the glue, but then we should be left with it a lot smoother. You can also take some really fine wet and dry paper and some water and smooth the surface. And then this is what we're left with. It's a lot better, we can't see any brush strokes, but it's not entirely smooth, so there will be another process of smoothing for me. I do this process around all of the armour that I've just primed. The next step in my smoothing process involved me trying to fill in any gaps with paint and then sand that down so that any fluctuating levels on the Flexbond become a lot more even. To do this, I decided to use a gloss black paint that I was going to use on the project. I chose this gloss black especially for the tutorial, as visually you can see exactly the differences and the levels on the surface. It makes it easier to detect what needs done. So I layer gloss black over the surface with different coats. Once it's done, it would look something like this. Now if I take some fine wet and dry paper and sand over it, you can see that we're starting to get matte areas on the surface. These mattified areas are the ones that sit higher up on the top. We are sanding them down to try and meet those glossy ones that are at the bottom. If I was sanding and everything turned matte, then I'd be quite confident that it'd be pretty smooth. You can see here on the boot, there's a lot of differences, there's brush strokes and everything, so I just keep working it with 600 and 1200 grit, wet and dry paper. I do this exact process throughout all the armour. I covered it in gloss black paint, about 3 or 4 layers to be exact. I sanded it. This took a bit of time. You will have to work the surface to be able to get it smooth. You can see on the breastplate I've done one side already and I sand the other side to match. I start with 600 grit and finish with 1200. Once the top was smoothed down, this is what it looked like. Before painting, make sure you've wiped the armour down and left it to dry completely. Now we can move on to the fun bit, which is adding colour to the armour. Most of the armour gets a grey-black base. To create this colour, I mixed two different airbrush paints that I had. It's mainly black with a hint of grey added. I added some thinner to this and then sprayed it with the airbrush. I applied this in 3 different coats, making sure each coat was completely dry before adding the next one. I add this paint to the under armour, to the breastplate, to the shoulder armour, and make sure that you cover the velcro on the shoulder armour and the leather before spraying this. I apply it to the armband, the armour that goes onto the gloves, the vambraces. Now that most of the armour has a base colour, we need to look at adding secondary and tertiary colours, etc. We need to mask off any areas that we don't want to get this next layer of paint. To do that, I use 2 different products. One is this Tamiya vinyl tape in 2 thicknesses. I use 3mm and 5mm. And I use frog tape in 2 different thicknesses. I use the vinyl tape for all of the edges. For straight lines, I just apply it down like this and cut off any excess. And then for curves, you can actually stretch this tape. So for this corner here, I can stretch it out and curve it round. This gives lovely clean lines. And then what you can do inside that section is add some frog tape. Frog tape is great as well for delicate surfaces. You don't want to use anything like masking tape because it can rip up the paint. If you don't use frog tape, you should be able to use a normal painter's tape for this. Once I've applied the masking tape, I just use a little wooden sculpting tool just to press down those edges. One problem with masking is sometimes the paint can seep underneath and cause bleeding. To avoid that, a trick is to use the base colour that's underneath and spray that along the edges. So if bleeding was to occur, it would be in the colour of the base, so you wouldn't see it. And it also creates a barrier, so with the next colour it's less likely to seep underneath. After masking out the other pieces of armour, I can then go around those edges also. Once dry, we can add our second colour of paint, which is kind of like a brownish pink. To get this colour, I mixed quite a few different airbrush paints. One of the colours I chose was actually a metallic colour, and I did this on purpose because I want this paint to have a bit of shine to it. The kind of purpley pink colours on their own just were a bit too Barbie-ish, so I added the brown to try and bring it back to a sort of more natural shade. One tip actually at the priming stage is to grab some scrap foam and prime that also. You can spray it onto your test piece and look at the colour. You can see for the belt this actually acts as the base colour. It's because it's the most prominent colour on here. I spray this all over the whole of the belt, focusing mainly on the main body of the belt. The domes and the metal part underneath get a chrome finish, so I'm not too fussed about those ones. Remember to airbrush the sides also. I actually add this colour to the knee armour as well, and to the heels of the boots. There's a little side part to the main boot also that gets a bit of this colour. The detail on the armband gets this colour also. Make sure the base colour is dry before moving on. I'm just showing you this again to reiterate how I do my masking process. So on the outside I've got the 5mm Tamiya tape, on the inside I've put the 3mm Tamiya tape, and I'm just filling in the little gaps with the frog tape. You can cut them to size with scissors. After covering the whole thing, I go round with the base colour as before to stop any bleeding. I then add paint colour number 3, which is like an aubergine. I apply it to any areas I have not masked, and what I actually did was add a bit more black because I wasn't too happy with the shade. I thought it wasn't dark enough. So this is the shade I ended up with. After it was dry, I could then take the masking tape off, and you could see it left me with nice clean lines in 2 different colours. I decided at this point to add another shade of the previous colour. I felt like the edges looked a bit more red, so I just took the exact same colour and added more red. I also applied it to some of the details on the front of the belt. I did this to give a nice subtle change in the colours and make it look a bit more dynamic. You can see the outside and the inside colours are a bit different there. I take this exact same colour and spray it onto the top. You can see for easiness I covered the top with a plastic bag and then used both vinyl and frog tape to mask it. I go back to the under armour at this stage and add paint 5, which is a darker purple. I took that reddish brown colour and kind of added some paints to make it look a bit darker. After masking out the belt again, this is for the chrome, and we go around all of the edges with the base colour underneath, to avoid any bleeding. Now I'm going to start the chroming process, which involves gloss black. I'm using gloss black as a base for the chrome, as it's what gives it the shine that we need. One thing I will say about the gloss black is it does tend to clog up the airbrush a lot more. You cannot thin it down. If you are going to use black gloss on anything, I would do it at the end of the day before you deep clean your whole airbrush. A tip I can give you is to really shake the bottle before you pour in the gloss black. I found that was a huge difference on the way that it's sprayed with myself. So after masking out the vambraces, I apply gloss black all around the edges. I also do this with the armour that goes onto the gloves. You can see I've masked out the under armour. These are the parts that are getting chromed, so I apply gloss to all of those sections. I apply the black gloss to the knee armour. I apply gloss black to the domes. I also apply gloss black to the breastplate. You do have to work fast and just work in one area at a time. If you go back over an area, the overspray tends to mattify for some reason, so you really need to do the whole area in a oneer. The paint should look wet without being too thick, which may cause runs in the paint. Now the very last paint I'm using is the chrome. With the chrome you need to spray it on really lightly. The whole point is that you want to see some of that gloss black underneath, because that's what gives it the shine that you see. If you just keep going over and over and over with the chrome, it's going to eventually just cover the entire thing and it won't look very shiny. So use it sparingly over the top and just make sure that it looks even. The chrome paint dries pretty instantly, so you can work along the belt, say, and then just go back over another section like momentarily afterwards. So this is quite a quick process. You can see the shine of it is really excellent. It looks a bit like a mirror. I apply chrome to all of the armour parts that I've painted gloss black. Let's talk finishes. So you don't need to varnish this chrome paint. I actually never varnished mine. However, I've found it does wear off with rubbing. The chrome paint will dull over time and lose its shine. If you're travelling, you may run into issues. I haven't yet found the perfect finish that preserves the shine whilst being protective and flexible. So my best advice if you want to varnish it somehow is to do lots of tests. I didn't add any weathering to this armour because it does look quite pristine in the film. However, just to give an extra touch, I put a little bit of black detail paint around all the rivets, just to help make them stand out. So now you've completed painting all your foam armour, and thanks for watching.